sure that all of you know that your experience has value and meaning and enjoy the experience. I know some of the people in the past, this was like a big stressing point, right? And walking through, like, what do we share? What do we do? And in the end, it was fun to hear from them and be like, oh, wow, like this was actually not what I expected. So I had some fun, sharing my story. I didn't have to worry about some of the facts and figures necessarily. There is a place and a time for that if you are interested, and I'll go through that in the next video. So real life stories are able to evoke powerful responses more than just bland facts and figures. I know that as a science person, so even I try to quiet my mind when it comes to science terms because I don't like to overwhelm people with that. But your story is extremely powerful. And when you share your story with your representatives, it helps them remember that there are real lives involved in these situations. So your story can forge those relationships, which is key for some of these meetings, is building these relationships with your elected officials so that they can think of you, their constituent, when things related to fibromyalgia do come up. I'm hoping there'll be more legislation and more things coming up for fibromyalgia soon, but this is all part of the process. And also just remember, I know we're working on stories and coming up with things and going to give some tips, but remember, your story cannot be wrong because it's your personal experience. So we can only help give tips, and maybe if you want to go over some of the questions that you have for your story, but it's your story and it belongs to you. And I know sometimes we just want to do it the right way, but you're sharing your experience and your lived experience with fibromyalgia. So just remember that and take time to enjoy the experience. And so also remember that you don't have to have all the answers. They might ask a lot of questions, and I've been in meetings where they asked a lot of different questions, and I'm like, I don't really have an answer for you, but I'll definitely look it up. And that's then that's something that you can follow up when you follow up in your meetings with. You'll be like, hey, I looked up, you asked this question, so here is what I found out. And I can get more into detail after we kind of do some of the sharing story experience as well, of some of the questions that came up that we honestly still don't have answers for based on the epidemiology and the research getting done, or the lack of research getting done for fibromyalgia. When it comes, so you're going to talk and share your story, keep it brief, the highlights, stay on topic, evoke an emotion of motivation, and then build relationships. So when we talk about keeping it brief, you want to focus on important events. Then stick to the highlights. So aim for a minute or 2 minutes to share your story. And I definitely recommend practicing. So write it down. You can share it in front of other people if you feel comfortable, or I love to practice in front of the mirror and say it out loud. Sometimes I have note cards or I have bullet points that I kind of do. So I make sure that I'm on track. I even set a timer on my phone so that I know I'm not going over 2 minutes, because sometimes if you love to talk, which I don't, but I know that there are people that do, you may not realize how much time is getting spent actually sharing. And if there's multiple people in the meeting as constituents, we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to share their story. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of timing when it comes to this. But if you got that story down in that elevator pitch frame, right? That minute or 2 minutes just to give those highlights, it's important that you can practice and go along with it and feel the flow. So for visualizing it, imagine it's like a movie trailer. Just give them the parts that grab their attention and leave them wanting more, right? Significant impact is how it's had on your life, maybe how it affects your family's life, and where you are now. And if you feel comfortable, you can try trying in your story to the asks that we have. But for now, just feel comfortable with just practicing your elevator pitch story. And when we say elevator pitch, you know the reference, right? You can jump on an elevator with someone, and at the end of the ride, wherever they get off on the floor, right, you're not sure how much time you have. So you got to pick those key points in your story to make an effective pitch. So you want to get it in before they jump off the elevator, but you want to leave them with asking questions. The greatest thing is if they can ask questions after, or they're motivated to get involved and be like, wow, it really resonated them. But you have to have this balance. So emotion is, if you're going to use emotion, make sure it motivates, not overwhelms. So once they get off the elevator, you don't want them running away from you as fast as possible, right? Chasing after you. So we're coming into the meetings with a different type of energy that we're going to balance between inspiration and realism. And I know it's difficult with fibromyalgia, especially because a lot of us have been living with it for many, many years. So that's why it might be just good to like highlight some of the key points and ask us questions too, because sometimes people don't realize when they're sharing their story that there's a really good point in their story that they can bring out and be like, oh my gosh, you have to share that point because it ties in so well to the needs of the community. So that's why it's kind of good to like outline and take notes and stuff like that to see, maybe what makes sense and practice. If you can practice in front of someone else, they can tell you like definitely and time you and be like, oh, you're done. So that way you'll realize like how much time you actually have. And again, with fibromyalgia, I know it can be tricky to frame your story in a positive way, but you can draw on that realistic picture of what can be done to help those who are battling fibromyalgia. So even if you haven't received the help that you needed, like this ties back to why you're giving a voice for a community and what the importance is of you being heard. So there's a lot of differences with this, but you can think about maybe like starting out with, when you were diagnosed, or did it take you 6 years to get a diagnosis? Are you struggling to find a provider that understands fibromyalgia? They put you through the gamut, maybe make it high level of your experience, but saying we need more providers to be educated in fibromyalgia. And so after you take a pause, after you share your story, and if there's another constituent in the room, they'll share their story. Everyone's going to kind of take a pause, right? And see and check in with the representative, the staffer, the legislative aide, whoever it is that you're meeting with, and see if they have questions for you. This is a perfect opportunity to bring it back to that sustained investment for fibromyalgia asks, but also if they have any feedback or if they have experience a little bit more with this, or if there's something else that they might consider noticing or pieces of legislation that you should take a look at. I know we had questions in the past with one congressman that he mentioned that they're really involved with genetics. So his big question for us was like, how does genetics relate to fibromyalgia? And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. And just be like, you know what? That's a great question. Like, how are you involved? Because I will go back and double check the information on fibromyalgia and send you a follow-up email. So again, this just goes back to not necessarily always having to have the answers. Don't panic, but just ask questions. I mean, do they feel that it'd be better for us to build a caucus? Do they like and would they sign on to appropriations? So these are definitely questions on like, taking a pause. You don't have to utilize the whole time to like share and just have a conversation. Everyone in the meeting, we're all human beings. And I know that there are representatives, but they're just human beings just like us. So